Black New Mexico. My name is Scott Carruthers, Executive Director of the New Mexico State Office of African American Affairs, where we provide change by means of support, advocacy, and resources relevant to the African American community. Once again, I'm thrilled to be with you today for a podcast coming out of the State Office of African American Affairs. The purpose of these podcasts are to discuss with you, the Black community, statewide issues we all face while trying to navigate through this COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to me turning it over to our facilitators, I would like to, on behalf of the office, offer our condolences to the Clark family. We lost Linda Clark recently. Our prayers are with Ashley and other family members. If you will, allow me to just have a few announcements of some of the current data. Again, the New Mexico Black Expo has been canceled. We are working on a plan directly with the governor's office to support Black businesses around the state. And once again, more information will come at a later date. We are working with the Department of Health and other collaborative partners on implementing a plan for testing throughout the state for African American. The targeted testing goal is at least 22,000. Most current information related to COVID-19 of overall numbers is 4,778. And as you well know, as I always say, there is a hotline for COVID-19 statewide. That number is 1-855-600-3453. You all, I would ask that you please, everyone stay healthy and stay safe. May God bless you. And now it is my honor to turn it over to our facilitators, Director Harvey, Director Covington, and Dr. Martin, who will introduce today's guests. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Scott, and good morning to everyone. My name is Jim Harvey, and I'm with the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice, and glad to be a part of this terrific team of really qualified and dedicated experts, Dr. Jamal Martin and Tanya Covington, along with the esteemed Scott Carruthers. We have a wonderful program for you today, and just an opening commentary. These are challenging times still for us. We're still faced with mixed messages about safety and about openings and closings and social distancing. Fortunately, we've got a governor and a team that is on top of all of the right things and making all the right and necessary decisions that help keep us informed, especially as we look at misinformation coming from other quarters, which I won't even mention at this time. We're still struggling for resources and with some of our healthcare providers, and there are questions about testing. Fortunately, today, we are joined by Eric Nixon. Eric is a human rights activist who resides here in Albuquerque. He was born in Opelika, Florida, and he moved to Berlin at the age of 9, and he's been in New Mexico ever since. He now resides here in Albuquerque, where he's raising his daughter, Chloe, who's now 16 years old. Eric's a human rights activist who is heavily involved in restorative justice initiatives for juveniles in New Mexico. He's also a member of The Group, which is a think tank, the Northwest Albuquerque Community Police Council, and one of my favorites, a robotics competition mentor for the National Society of Black Engineers Junior Chapter, that's NSBE. Eric frequently attends meetings with the Albuquerque mayor and city councils to discuss issues regarding the Albuquerque community and participates in activities such as city council meetings, open town halls, Albuquerque public schools meetings, and other initiatives. Eric has an associate's degree in aviation electronics from Community College of the Air Force, a bachelor's degree in university studies from UNM, a master's degree of Masters of Science in Information Technology Management from the University of Phoenix, and he is on his way to securing his doctorate in a program at Capella University. Intertwined with the living of life, Eric has been a lifelong adventure of discovering African history and empowerment. He identifies himself as an African American and is extremely proud of his culture and ethnicity. I give you Eric Nixon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Director, and the rest of the board, as well as all the participants of this meeting. Before I start, I just wanted to say that in this pandemic and some of the things that are going on, we've seen some things on the news that are just downright bizarre, awful, and evil that have been happening to Black folks, so on and so forth. And so one of the things I wanted to focus on in this briefing is protecting ourselves, but also utilizing the resources to do so in our community. I work for the Department of Homeland Security currently. And so we have been instructed that we will probably be continuing to telework until September. That tells you something about how serious this COVID-19 thing is. So with that said, I just want to kind of reiterate that all the precautions that are taken, whether you're wearing gloves and a mask, both, washing hands frequently, all of those things, in my opinion, are absolutely necessary. Continue doing that. Again, this isn't coming from any political affiliations or anything like that. This is just facts. This is the stuff that you comb the internet, you comb the news cycles and things like that, and find out what's going on. And again, those are directives that came from me on my occupation at the Department of Homeland Security, is that we will be in place working from home until September of this year, of 2020. Now, let's go ahead and get into it. So, protect and serve Albuquerque. What can we do as citizens to protect ourselves? Well, there's a couple of things that we're talking about when it comes to protecting ourselves in this city. There's the pandemic and the current threat of loss of life, getting ill, and those kind of things. And then, of course, there's the general protection of the African American community within the community of Albuquerque, and of being citizens of the state of New Mexico here in North America, in the United States. Next slide, please. Okay, so before I get into the CASA, I want to give you guys an update. I started at the Northwest Community Policing Council on the west side here, and I'd been there for about 2.5 years, where I served on that council, provided input into meetings, provided facilitating the meetings and setting up key speakers and people to come in and do some work at the CPC meetings that they had once a month. I have currently taken a position with the Community Civilian Police Oversight Agency, the CPOA. How does this tie into the CASA? Well, the CASA is a court-appointed settlement agreement. And you can see by the slide that this occurred in November 2012, with the Department of Justice launching an investigation on APD's pattern of excessive force. You guys may have remembered the James Boyd incident that happened in the foothills, where James Boyd was killed by 20 officers of APD, a mentally ill person who was taken in. This was one of the key court cases, as well as some others, that indicated the excessive force pattern at APD. Department of Justice steps in, The Department of Justice makes recommendations. They set up a structure of a monitor. And within this monitor, this court-appointed settlement agreement, our city has agreed to adhere to it. What does this mean for the community as a whole, but also for the Black community? Excessive force is being looked at the national level, and it should be, because excessive force is happening all over the United States. The main thing is that we have things that we can do about it within our community to answer to any illegitimate possible excessive force, as well as any complaints happening within the police department and any assaults that are going on within the Black community, but as, like I said, in the community as a whole. Next slide. So 2 things: Citizens Police Oversight Agency and the Community Policing Council. The Community Policing Council being that council that is citizen based. These are independent of the Albuquerque Police Department, and they're also somewhat independent of the city, with the CPC being more independent. Next slide. So the Civilian Police Oversight Agency was established in 2014. This agency receives, investigates, and reviews complaints, recommendations submitted by community members for or against the Albuquerque Police Department. So basically what this is saying is that this is kind of like a watchdog group made up of independent, non-law enforcement personnel within our community. I'm one of those. I sit on the board now, or should I say I sit on the policing council, sometimes called the POB. But at any rate, what we're doing basically is anytime any complaints come through, according to the Department of Justice and by justification of the Department of Justice, we look at those complaints, we investigate those complaints. Currently, there are more investigators being hired. When they come across the council's desks, we take a look at those, we make recommendations, we review those and make those recommendations to the chief as to actions that should happen. Why is this important to the Black community? Because what I anticipate in doing this work for the past 3 years is that there are a lot of incidents that happen within this community, the Albuquerque community, to Black folks that are not being reported. This is critical that these are reported. This doesn't mean that there's going to be some sort of retaliation. This information doesn't get back to the police or anything like that. This, again, this is an independent investigation board. And that gives you an advantage as a citizen, because at this point, you don't have to just take it. You know, our people have been just taking it for the longest time, have been turning the cheeks, doing these kind of things. But if we're going to make this community safer, we have to start holding those who are in violation of doing anything other than protecting and serving accountable. What does this mean? Well, it can be a lot of things. For example, before I came on board with the CPOA, actually filed a complaint against an officer. This officer decided that they were going to threaten me with writing me a ticket if I didn't remove my truck from a handicap parking slot. Didn't argue. I just said, I'm not in a slot. I don't park in handicap parking slots. So went outside, looked at the truck. At that point, I pulled my camera out and I said, I'm going to videotape this incident. And so as I started rolling, I put the camera on my truck, I put it on there, I said, this is not a handicap parking slot. Okay. So this female officer went, oh, well, okay. Didn't apologize, didn't say have a good day, didn't say anything like that. When I came back into the sporting goods store, they said, we told her that you weren't in a handicap parking slot. She went up and talked to me anyway. She wanted to complain, or she wanted to threaten me anyway with giving me a ticket as if I was going to move. So I filed the complaint, got her number. I let her know I was filing the complaint, by the way, to let her know. And so did that. The complaint went through. I didn't get a feedback as to what the determination was at that point. They had some sort of mix up in that. But as a follow through, I asked some individuals what happened, what was going on. And there was training, ironically, I wouldn't say ironically, but the training had changed within APD a little bit, where now they were adding some of the tactics and adjusting some of the tactics for the training the new officers coming through as far as interacting with our with the community. Did something come out of that? Yes. One of the things that came out is that it sent the message that not everyone is going to just roll over and take a lot of the abuses and a lot of the things that are going on in the community by the police. The Civilian Police Oversight Agency is an independent agency of the city government. With the CPC, there's a meeting that they have each month, one side of each month. There are 4 quadrants of Albuquerque. The northwest quadrant is where I live, the southwest quadrant, the northeast quadrant, and the southeast quadrant. Each of these meetings is very important, and it's very important that we show up to these meetings because they're talking about a lot of different things that are going on. A lot of these board members really want to get involved in saying, okay, we want to hold police accountable, but we also want to see community policing in the community. In other words, it's not just about the Johnny Law, sling the gun, go in and take control of the situation, that kind of thing. It's be part of the community where you live, where these officers are actually involved in a lot of different day-to-day things, and then become part of that community. What this does is it puts a human face on the community so that the police department has to acknowledge that. It's very difficult to harass or do something inappropriate to a neighbor or the person that you buy your milk from or the gas attendant, so on and so forth. So this is a Civilian Police Oversight Agency, and the Community Policing Council is going to come up and be very important on that. Next slide. And again, Community Policing Council, you have the 6 councils. I think I missed one because I said the 6 quadrants. I think there's 6. I'll find out what those other 2 are. But you can really engage in a lot of dialogue, and you can bring up any community events or anything that's happening in the community, especially when it comes to safety and health, that you want to point out. It also gives you an interface with the police officers, and more importantly, the community Albuquerque Police Department's management, which was the management has been cited on several things as far as when it came to excessive force, when it came to training excessive force, and when it came to disciplinary actions. They were found in violation of several different things on the CASA. You can just imagine what those things actually translate into. Okay, next slide. So when and where? If you want to know more about the CPOA, if you want to know more about the CPCs, those links that are on this slide deck. And by the way, folks, Devin, if you want to send this slide deck out to anyone who's on this mailing list, feel free to do so, and they can use it as they see fit. But these 2 links will get you to the city's website for the Civilian Police Oversight Agency, as well as the Community Policing Council. You can also look up the meeting times, what day of the year, what day of the month those meetings are going to happen, and also any of the other ad hoc meetings that happen. Also, there are monitor reports that come out monthly. They're on these websites. One of the things you're going to notice is on these websites, it's not necessarily up to date. This is where that information is to come. We're addressing that right now because that's one of the first things when I came on board with the CPOA is I kind of was surprised and disappointed that a lot of these things were not up to date. In other words, some of these meetings and some of these meeting minutes and things like that go all the way back to 2018 in some instances. However, one of the main reasons that I've served on CPC and the CPOA is that it's very important that for the Black community, Black faces are seen in places where enforcement is, law enforcement, I should say, is active, whether it be community policing, whether it be city council meetings, wherever it is, it's necessary that there's at least they're aware that we are aware and that we are involved in what's going on. Next slide. I don't think I had another one. Let's see. Yes. Now, this is the most important thing. So when it comes to filing your complaints, I've set up another link here, and this is either a complaint or accommodation form. You know, cops do something good, you can put in accommodation. If cops do something that is a complaint, then you can put that complaint in as well. This is not the complaint form to say, okay, well, wait a minute, you know, my trash wasn't picked up and I'm gonna file a complaint against the city. A lot of this has to do with law enforcement. How are your police officers acting? What's going on? There are a lot of times, and the trepidation in the Black community when it comes to law enforcement is understandable historically, but at some point we're gonna have to step up. We're gonna have to start asking for badge numbers. We're gonna have to start asking for names when we see law enforcement acting inappropriately. By the way, Black men and women, when you are being stopped and a police officer puts his hand on his gun for any reason, maybe he just wants to rest his thumb or whatever, that is considered an act of aggression, okay? They should not be putting their hands on their tasers or their guns. That's just a no-no. The reason I say that is because, especially when it comes to our young people of color, this intimidating action has a resonating effect on our youth. And I'd like to see it stopped. This is one of the things I'm absolutely bird dogging, are any of these kind of, how should I say, non-oral actions that are basically saying a lot more than the words would if they were doing that. And again, I believe that APD is trying hard, very hard, to address these kind of actions in these kind of situations and things that go on. The other thing is body cams. If you're being stopped and you're being pulled over, it is well within your right to say, are you wearing a body cam and is that body cam on? Okay, to have that there. The reason being is because those body cams were one of those big bones of contention in the police department. And the intention of a body camera, of course, is not just to protect yourself, but also to protect the officer, to show and visualize transparently that they are acting accordingly. Now, there have been some controversies when it comes to body cams and the discipline around body cams. For instance, and you guys may have seen this in the news, where for some reason, whenever something happened that was considered controversial, you couldn't find that body cam footage, or the body cam wasn't turned on, or the battery ran out, or et cetera, et cetera. Those are violations, and in my opinion, those are complaints too. I'd like to know when someone says, oh, well, my body cam battery's out, so I don't have that on. And the reason being is we've spent millions of dollars, we being the taxpayers, to provide body cams for these officers, and they should be used at all times. That's just the way it is. That's the taxpayers' money. Let's see. Next slide. Questions? I welcome questions.
Great, Eric, thank you so much for that, because what you've done is you've provided a good backdrop of incredible and important information for people, particularly during this time, around the question of whether they've been treated unfairly or not. And so these resources that you shared with us are really important. I'm sure that I've got a list of questions here already, and I'll try to get to those. But you know, I'm sure that people are concerned about things like being followed in the store when you're wearing your mask, or subjected to off comments from people, you know, on the street, in the store, police, other first responders, even making off comments if you are wearing a mask or not. Police making unfounded stops. You're driving down the street, you're wearing your mask, you get pulled over for something. And even being asked to work in unsafe environments. So let's just get to these questions. And Dr. Martin and Tanya, Scott, I invite you all to join in with Eric in responding to these questions as we get to them here. So let's see. First question.
I think Viola had one as well.
Okay.
Um,
Viola, let's see. You want to read it then, Eric? Go ahead.
I can. She said, do you anticipate violations or police interactions will be heightened during the COVID-19 pandemic? I don't anticipate it, and let me tell you why. One of the good things about the CASA is that um, Albuquerque Police Department is under the scrutiny of Department of Justice. The Department of Justice has a monitor that is hired by the Department of Justice, paid for, well, hired by the department or mandated by the Department of Justice and paid for by the city. So what that means, Viola, is that you have a lot of eyes on Albuquerque right now. Whereas the violations, I don't anticipate any of those going up. I do anticipate police interaction going up if the requirements and the stringent rules around COVID-19 and the adherence to them are enforced to a certain degree. With that said, and this is one of the things we have to be clear on our community and understand our rights, our inalienable rights, that does not necessarily mean that we would be targeted or that we should be treated any way that anybody else should not be. In other words, there is no reason in that capacity to be treated anything other than like a tax-paying citizen of the United States. So no, I don't anticipate that. While I anticipate the interactions will be heightened, I don't anticipate that any of these violations would be. However, I will say to you this: we are on the ready.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Dr. Martin. Dr. Martin, you have a question.
Oh, I was about to type it in, but okay. Eric, thank you for this. Again, thank you for this important information about reporting abuses by law enforcement and ABQ. This is a question for everyone also too. Since it appears that being Black is a pre-existing condition, are there things that the community ought to know about in terms of civil and human rights issues as it relates to crisis standards of care under resource-constrained settings in the context of public health emergencies? I think this is similar to a question that Ms. Khadijah Bottoms has posed also too.
Exactly.
Yes. So again, not just with the CPOA, not just with the APD, but looking at the Attorney General's office, looking at the governor's office, for example, with refugees, like Khadijah Bottoms is mentioning with refugees, these disparities that are occurring, and the thing about it is we're not crazy, we're not sensitive, we're not angry, we're not any of that. Something is actually happening to the Black community when it comes to COVID-19. That's pretty obvious. Where I think the system breaks down is being able to tax that system or push that system when it comes to what is happening in our Black community and why it's happening in our Black community. I think that also these are violations of human rights. Because we are tax-paying citizens, I think that it's absolutely necessary to involve a lot of these government entities at the state level in anything that's going on. So again, collectively, we have to be on the same page as to what we're going to accept and what's not going to be accepted. When I look at, when we take consideration of the refugee community, you take into consideration, our condition of Black. One of the things that I've taken away from this since I was pretty young is that the problem isn't that we're Black. The problem is that those violators are not. That's always been the problem the whole time. So when I look at that, I'm not looking at it from a standpoint of saying, okay, this is something that I'm asking for despite my condition of my African condition or heritage. This is something that's inalienable to me because of my heritage of this country. And so we have rights to, extend our rights as far as they can go in order to get the help, get the aid, and so on and so forth that we have. We also have to look out for each other. For example, if we're in the hospitals, which I think are kind of dangerous places right now, we see these kind of infractions going on. It doesn't necessarily happen to you. You can witness some of these things going on and have those reported up. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of feel like the governor's office is really a proponent for testing, and also is in somewhat support of the Black community when it does come to testing. That's what I've taken away from some of the briefings and some of the things that are going on. Did I answer your question, sir?
There's more to it, but we can go for now. Hit some other people.
Okay.
I think there's other things we need to have dialogues about in relation to this, because I can definitely tell you of the inequities that exist in healthcare systems. No doubt about that. So
indeed.
And I think that FEMA and Department of Health and Human Services, Homeland Services, as well as HSS, have a list of policies to report civil rights violations and human rights. Well, not even human rights, because they don't care about human rights. That's another story. But civil rights violations in these areas. So that's something that we need to get out to the community also too.
Absolutely.
Because we don't have, if that's the case, then we need to complain to the Inspector General for each one of these departments.
Indeed. And that's kind of the Office of Inspector General is one of the places that's really effective, because there's no criteria for filing a complaint. It's fairly effective in at least raising it to that level. And the more it's raised to that level, the more identity is going to be. But to your point, there's a lot of work to be done in the Black community as far as raising awareness to some of the violations and some of the things that are going on. That's where I kind of feel like it's all hands on deck. Like I said, I don't necessarily have to be sick with COVID in order to, identify and be aware of some of the things that are going on. One of the things that I find frustrating in the work that I do, Dr. Martin, is where I'll be talking to my people of my culture, and they have these incredible stories about what has happened to them and so on and so forth. But then when it comes to whether or not they reported it, they didn't report it. Now, that could happen for a lot of different reasons. Like I said, there's a trepidation to doing it. And to the point that I'm trying to make is that this isn't going to be the time for the trepidation. If something like that is happening, if you don't want it to happen to your child or your grandmother or your neighbor, something like that, we might want to nip this in the bud by kind of stepping up, even though that would be kind of difficult to say, I have to file this complaint, because the next person behind me that files a complaint, that's going to get a little louder and a little louder and a little louder, to where now we see a pattern that's going on and we can break through some of this stuff that's going on. A lot of work, but definitely.
I agree. And last comment on that is that, yes, this is a time for courageous conversation. So thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let me pose a question and just encourage our listeners as well. If you have questions, please type them in. I can see them and we will respond to them. And so while you're doing that, Eric, Dr. Martin, anyone else that wants to respond to this? We've heard about on the national news issues of employees in unsafe working environments, and they're being required to show up to work. And if they don't show up to work, there's going to be retribution. They'll be fired, they'll be denied unemployment compensation, any number of other things. I've heard some stories about issues like that locally here. What happens if someone is being asked to work in an unsafe environment?
Good question. So you can be asked to work in an unsafe working environment. If that is obvious and that is something that's happening, that does not preclude you from your benefits, so on and so forth. But then, since it's an at-will state, that doesn't necessarily mean you cannot be fired. There's a lot of onus on this that comes to the business owners and the employers to as far as what information they're going, or should I say, how they're going to support their employees. The thing about it is, if something happens and it's in violation, what I mean by violation, that's big. That can be something where you didn't feel comfortable. It's not just that you were tired, you didn't feel like coming to work. It's like you needed a mask, you needed gloves, you don't have the mask or the gloves, and that's not being provided. And I'm going to go ahead and check this out, but I'm pretty sure it's an OSHA standard violation that if something happens or is changed in your work environment in any way, shape, or capacity, that is that employer's job or requirement to make sure that you have the safety protocols in place in order to do that. So realistically and technically, I mean, if I was going to be consulting a lawyer about this, I would ask them about that. Because if you're serving food or you're working somewhere and all of a sudden you don't have masks and you don't have gloves where you should have them, and we know for a fact that people can become contagious and can contract this virus within the workplace, there's kind of grounds there, to be honest with you. I'm just saying in general. However, there are, to Dr. Martin's point, there are conversations that have to be had because there are regulations behind this kind of whether it's discrimination or not. I would say it's just outright dereliction of caring for your employers, or excuse me, your employees in that situation. And I know that they have to answer to somebody for that.
All right, boy.
May I add something to that?
No.
May I add something to that?
Yes,
Well, please.
No, Eric is right. These are clear OSHA regulations and standards that are in place, which also a local Department of Health, whether city or state, has to administer and follow up on as well. But problematically is people are only concerned about that right now because of the fear of this contagion, which I understand. And as I said before, the biggest problem with these issues is the contagion of fear. So more people are afraid of what they call this invisible illness. But tell you the truth, within every workplace, there are dozens of toxic chemicals and all kinds of things that cause harm to people that we don't even think about. And the regulations are tricky because many times it's measured in parts per million, parts per billion. So it's difficult to talk about in that sense. And there are multiplicities of these chemicals and things that exist in offices and schools and homes. But the other side of this is just everybody, in terms of awareness, this is where it comes into being a part of a participatory democratic republic. You know, we have people who are involved who are trying to undo all of these regulations to allow this abuse to take place. And that's a real issue. When lobbyists and others start changing laws to maintain this. So when you think about increasing cancer rates, for example, and other comorbidities that happen when people are exposed to a virus and they become sicker, it's because the environment is toxic from the get-go, and not just because of a virus. So I just want to make that comment to create some more awareness.
That's a valuable comment because it certainly comes right back to being treated fairly, which is something that we've never been afforded fair treatment anyway. And so COVID-19 has just exacerbated the realities of our life and our experiences.
Exactly.
I think that's really important.
Well, that's why I think Kimberly Crenshaw's notion that Black is a pre-existing condition for these people. You know, when they see Black,
yes.
You know, it's automatically like you're inferior.
Exactly.
And that's how we have to address white supremacy.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And the thing about that is it doesn't preclude us from exercising our rights to do things.
Exactly.
Especially when it comes in this day and age. Like I said, I think it's all hands on deck. I think that we have to take action as collectively, as a community at this point, so that there's an understanding that there are certain things that we're just not going to tolerate or we're not going to accept, especially when it comes to COVID-19, especially when it's obvious and blatant disregard and discrimination. They have to be addressed immediately and as soon as possible. Whether it's just one complaint or 1,000 complaints, we all have to collectively do that.
Word up. And please, let's get back to the participants, because I don't want them to think that we're monopolizing this conversation.
Absolutely. Eric, I do want to just comment. I did see a question. Is there a new DOJ report out? I
don't believe so.
Okay.
Not from the one from March, but no, I don't believe so yet. There's supposed to be one out, but no, I don't believe it's out yet.
But not yet. Okay, great. Tanya, let's go to you. I know you got some announcements and some resources that you want to share. And I know that one of the things we probably need to place heavy emphasis on, you know, is accommodations around on testing, particularly for the Black community. Tanya?
Yes, my understanding is that we will be very soon hearing from someone from the Department of Justice about testing that is going to happen specifically for the Black community. We're very fortunate that our governor has made this a priority. And as soon as we have that information, we will be getting it out through this podcast, as well as through the Office of African American Affairs. So please, if anyone needs to be tested or wants to be tested, There are right now some hotline numbers, but you can also always get in touch with the Office of African American Affairs. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going to be coming up for us in the future. We are going to be talking about next Monday, as a matter of fact, we will have Dr. Mario Cruz, who is a Black psychiatrist and the head of the New Mexico Black Wellness Coalition, will be talking about Black mental health during COVID. He has been very, very involved with what's going on with COVID through the University of New Mexico Hospital. Also then on Monday, May 25th, even though it is Memorial Day, we will have Dr. Lisa Taylor, and she will be talking about pre-existing conditions, why they're important, and what it is that we especially need to know during this COVID crisis. Then on Monday, June the 1st, Tammy Watson from Office of African American Affairs will be talking about mask and mask making. We want to make sure that everybody in the African American community statewide is able to have a mask, and if not, we will be working with the NAACP to make sure that they're available. So we're going to be looking for supplies, looking for people who are willing to sew them, and then looking for people who are willing to help us distribute them. Then on Monday, June the 8th, Director Jim Harvey will be talking about interpersonal violence now, and how that has changed and is changing during the COVID vaccine, until we have a COVID vaccine. So I really encourage and invite you to get this information out to as many Black people across the state as you can. Let them know that we will be doing this every Monday at least for the next several weeks, trying to make sure that whatever information is needed in the Black community, that we will have a way to get that information to you.
Awesome. And I want to go ahead and thank you guys for today's podcast. Thank you, Mr. Nixon, for all of the awesome information. And thank you, Dr. Martin, Jim, and Tanya, for all of your guys' awesome input. Like Tanya was saying, next week will be, the topic will be Black mental health with expert Mario Cruz. So if you guys have questions on Black mental health, if you guys can please send that over to, the email is admin.oaaa@state.nm.us, and that will be in the chat. So again, if you guys have any questions on Black mental health, please send those in prior to. Again, we want to thank all the participants for joining, and we'll see you guys again next week.